Hello, I'm Shannon Hopkins, one of the co-founders of Rooted Good, and co-hosting this season with me is my colleague, Mark Elsdon. Hey, Mark.
Hey there, Shannon.
Our theme this season is properties with new purpose. We believe this is a profound moment for the church, full of opportunity. There are so many amazing stories of churches doing amazing new ministries with their building and land. We want to introduce you to the pastors and leaders that are stepping out and showing us a new way. Their stories are phenomenal, and their work is helping to lay a path into a new and good future, both for the world and the church. There are congregations redeveloping their land, building affordable housing, launching social enterprises, and serving their neighbors in new ways. However, this isn't easy work. It just isn't. And the way forward isn't always clear. There are so many questions. So we're framing this whole season around the questions we keep getting asked.
So our question for this episode is, what about things using our buildings or land other than housing? There's so much talk about building housing if we want to look at using buildings or land differently. But what about things other than housing? And what are some examples other than housing? Our guest today is Chrisy Ennen. Chrisy is the pastor of Gulf Shores Presbyterian Church in Gulf Shores, Alabama, and they did something, well, other than housing. We're also particularly delighted to have Chrisy on the show today because Chrisy and her church were early participants in the pilot program of our Rooted Good, Good Futures Accelerator, which back then was called the Oikos Accelerator. And so it's fun for us to catch up with her and their church and what they've been doing since then, and since their accelerator process completed, and since they actually went ahead and did a really dynamic project as a result of it. So it's really great to have Chrisy on. And what do you think, Shannon, about this conversation? What were some of the things that stuck out to you about what we talked about with Chrisy?
I love hearing how transformative the work has been for the church and the wider community. And I loved the simplicity, like the simplicity and quickness of it. That, so often we hear about these big projects and it takes years to get off the ground, but she's 2 years in and up and running, and it's already had this transformative impact on the congregation.
Yeah, I mean, they did it in less than 2 years with very little upfront money, and it has really been transformative, both to the ministry, the vibrancy of the congregation, and to their financial reality. That's
Yeah,
pretty remarkable. Yeah.
really
I thought it was
remarkable.
also interesting that we hear yet again, as we've been hearing throughout this entire series, how important it is to listen to the neighborhood and to connect
Yeah.
with the community and to start there, not to
Mhm.
start with the practical questions about locks and leases, but to start with the questions about who are we and who are we connected to and who is around us and what are their gifts and what are their needs. And I feel like that comes up every single time. Yeah.
Every time. Well, and it is that, right? That it's meeting a real need.
That's right.
I
That's
love
right.
it.
Sort of responding to that need and then just taking the next step.
Mm. Yeah. So let's dive in.
That's
Chrissy, thank you so much for joining us today. As you know, in this podcast, we are talking about church property and how church properties are finding new purposes. We're focused this season on the moment that the church is facing across the United States as it relates specifically to its assets, its use of its building and land. Could you talk a little bit about your context and your congregation and what brought you into this conversation?
So 4 years ago, actually 4 years ago this month, I became the pastor at First Presbyterian Church of Gulf Shores, Alabama. Yes, that was 2020, middle of the pandemic. Great time to take on a new challenge. So when I was in the process of coming here, I knew that they had enough money in a special fund to pay me for 2 years, but I hadn't had a chance to get a hold of the financials yet. And so over that first 6 to 8 months, it took a lot for me to really figure out what was going on. And when I finally did, I realized we were not in a sustainable system. They were going to run out of money before 2 years, and we were just going to be out of luck. And so we just started talking about what the church wanted, where the church was wanting to go, what was really important to them. We started asking the hard questions like, should we sell the building? Should we sell the van that we haven't used since I'd been there? Should we, do some of these things? And then what are the resources that we actually have that we could do something with? And it was about this time that one of my seminary professors posted online this thing called the Oikos Accelerator. And I was like, I wonder if this is something that we could use to help us think through these things. And so we just started using that product. We started asking lots of questions through our meetings, but knew something had to change because what we were doing was not sustainable.
That's really interesting. Yeah. And we've since renamed that the Good Futures Accelerator. But I love to hear you're one of the originals that tried the pilot, right? There's a lot of talk in the sort of system or around and articles and so on about repurposing property right now. Obviously, it's a big conversation and among many churches, and very often churches sort of gravitate quickly towards housing as an option, affordable housing or senior housing or student housing or some sort of housing. But that's not the direction you ended up going. Can you just tell us a little bit about why and how did you get to what you ended up doing, and how did that happen in your setting?
As we went through this process and we're asking lots of questions, we formed a team called the Moving Forward team. And if you went into my office, you would see giant Post-it notes. And what we did was we lined Post-it notes on the wall of our fellowship hall, and we just brainstormed. What could we do? What are the things that we could do? And of course, selling the building was one of those things that we could have done. We could have thought about, doing something different on this property. But as we talked and as we narrowed things down and as we asked questions of the community around us, what is needed here? If you've never been to Gulf Shores, what you would find when you get here is we are very landlocked. We do not have a lot of land area that is unused. And that means property values are very high. So one of the first things that we learned that is really needed was affordable office space for small business, because to get any kind of space here is just astronomically expensive. The second thing we found was needed is childcare. And as we looked at those two options, we decided childcare carried a little too much risk and not as much potential for reward. But the other thing that we really wanted to make sure was we were making a decision about a ministry and not just a financial problem. And so we really thought through a lot of things in order to figure out what to do. And we decided that because we know in Scripture that we are to work for the good of the community in which we are, we decided, since small business is a really important backbone of a small town, we needed to do what we could to support small business. And so we went with the idea of a business center, using the Christian ed space that we had in this facility that wasn't being utilized, to the point that every single room was full of stuff because we weren't using the rooms for their intended purpose. And it didn't take long, and we had to clean out more rooms and more rooms because people were coming to us and saying, oh, I need office space. Oh, I need office space. And so we basically said the hand-in-hand business center was going to be a place where we could equip small businesses to grow and to thrive in this area. And the second business that moved into this space had to leave the space because they outgrew it. So just a great example of what we were wanting to do with this space. And people who couldn't afford to rent somewhere else have been able to rent here.
So how many businesses are there now?
Well, we have 10 office spaces in the Hand in Hand Business Center. We have 9 businesses using those 10 offices. And then here's a fun part. This month, the first week of August, we added our nursery space and a former parlor space. And guess what's happening? There's a daycare that has come in to rent those spaces. So instead of just doing the business center and an affordable office space, we have this daycare now that is renting the space, but we're a part of supplying the other thing that is needed in our community. Like, I get goosebumps every time I think about it, because it's like God said, oh, you're going to do that? Okay, well, just wait. We're also going to do the other. And it's just been a huge blessing for us to be able to open this space up in that way.
I love it. I wonder, Chrisy, could you talk a little bit about what the life of the church Monday to Friday looks like now compared to where it looked like, it looked like when you started?
4 years ago, I was the only one in the office because of COVID. And we had a music director and a pianist, but they weren't ever here. So I was just by myself, and it was silent all the time. Now there is activity in this facility constantly. Like, I'm sitting here and I'm listening to the kids laughing across the hall. We are also sharing space with another church. So the United Methodist Church, some of them have left that denomination. And so there were 2 of those churches in this area, and people left those churches when they left the denomination and created another United Methodist Church who didn't have a home. So we said, why don't you come share our worship space? So we're also sharing space with this church. And so they're having events, we're having events. The business center, I've got at least 4 different seminars that are scheduled for our fellowship hall, where business owners can come in and learn things like marketing. Like, we're going to be having, for our chamber, we're going to be having a small business expo, and someone's going to come in and say, here's how you can utilize the expo to your business's assets. So there's just movement all the time. I can walk down the hall. I can talk with the artist that has a spot. You can go down the hall. You can have a massage. Your young preschool children can go to speech therapy. You can talk to a realtor and a rental specialist. We have a property owners association. We have a podcaster. I mean, we just have this variety of people that are just in and out of the building all the time. And I'm never alone anymore.
Do you think of this and does your church think of this as like a rental thing, sort of, or as a program of the church, or something else? Like, how do they think of it?
We have really branded this as a ministry of the church. Yes, it is bringing rental income, but really it is a ministry of the church. I mean, every quarter we have a hand-in-hand luncheon where all of the business owners come and a few of us from the church come, and we do a little potluck and we just talk about what's happening. The people in the church just are excited every time I saw Kristen put up a new painting, or, I talked to this person this week, and we have branded it as a ministry of the church. Yes, it does help our bottom line. Absolutely. But it is a way that we can support the community, and that's how it is seen.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how the church has come along with you, that they feel that level of ownership, that this is a ministry of the church. Like, were they ready for this work, or was it what did you have to do as a pastor to bring them on the journey?
Well, pastors, we have to be really careful, right? When we step into a new role, we can't just come in and say, oh, let's just change everything and do it differently. And I think it all started the very first, our board is called our session. So our very first session meeting led via Zoom because it was COVID. I led the session in a guided meditation for them to just dream, to think about the possibilities, to think about what they wanted the church to be. And so I think because we started our relationship with me giving them the ownership and the ability to dream about what they wanted the church to be, as we continued to talk, as we continued to learn together, there was this openness to maybe we could do something different. And, there's a lot of churches who say they want to change, they want to do something different, but they don't really mean it. But when this church was given the opportunity to do something different, people just stepped up. I mean, we had to clear 10 rooms, clear them. They were full, top to bottom with stuff. People stepped up. They helped move everything out. We needed to put locking door handles on all of the classroom doors. We had a member who said, I will buy those and have them installed, and took care of it. We had people who said, you know what, I will take care of the landscaping over here to make it look nice. So as we're bringing people in, just people that just stepped up and said, you know what, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to help you with this, and I'm going to make sure that we have this happen. And that is how they come to embrace it, because they became a part of building what we're doing.
It sounds like it's created some energy in the congregation.
Absolutely. And it's been interesting because we've had, not an influx of a bunch of new people, but there's been trickles of new people that have come in younger age groups than you usually see in small churches, because they're hearing that there's something going on. There's an energy that people are starting to learn, oh, this church is doing things differently. Oh, they're letting an artist come and be in their space. They're letting a massage therapist come be in their space. They're letting 20 kids come be in their space every day. And there's just this energy around it. And so as the congregation starts to see, then our demographics are shifting a bit. I've been here 4 years, and there's been one kid in church. She's 5 now. So she was 1 or 2 when we started. Last Sunday, I did a children's sermon for 4 children, she being the oldest. And people are just like, things are happening. And it's because, I honestly believe it's because we said, Lord, we will do whatever we can to serve our community. We're not out trying to pull people from other churches. That's it. It's just, we said, we're going to serve this community, and people are hearing that, and people say, I want to be a part of that.
And are some of those new people coming, are they, just to sort of better understand, are they coming from the businesses that are situated, or just coming from the wider community?
Just coming from the wider community.
Yeah. So it's not like if you build it, they'll come. Like if you kind of put them in there, you weren't intending to sort of try to capture all those business owners as members at the same time.
Not at all. And they aren't. They
Sure.
have, they either go to church or they don't go to church, and they have their own places. It's just the wider community saying, oh, this church is really living out what the gospel is. So
yeah, so it's not so much this like direct, like the people that we serve in this way are then becoming church members. It's more that the church is changing in such a way that it then becomes interesting, engaging, attractive, whatever it might be, for a larger, different set of people to check it out. Yeah.
I wonder, as you sit here, 4 years on with the business center up and running, and all this new life in the church, and Monday to Friday, and I wonder what has surprised you about this work.
When I agreed to take this call, I had been in a really long journey in 2 different denominations towards ordination, and this is technically my first call. I've served churches for a long time in other positions, but this was my first call. And when I took this, I was like, God is just so good. He's sending me to the beach. This is kind of going to be this. For all of this, I'm going to put you in your favorite place. And then I realized when I got here, it's way more than that. I have an MBA, so I have this business mind. I have this business background. And I go, God, you just knew this church, what this church needed, and that it needed the wisdom and the insight that God has given me through, my varied school careers. And it's just been surprising to me to just watch how God has tied these things together. The partnerships that we have been able to form, with different groups in the area, the Chamber of Commerce, the Gateway Initiative, Magnolia United Methodist Church, just all of these little pieces where God has just kind of brought it together in a way that there's no way we could have thought of doing that. It was very, very much a God thing. And little silly things. I just have to tell this story. Last Thursday, we had a blood drive in our fellowship hall. And that morning, the artist that is in our business center just was feeling like, I need to do something to give back to the church for all of what they provide for us. And so she just felt like, I'm going to go trim the bushes on this end of the building. And so she all morning was out there trimming bushes. And after someone gave blood, they came around the outside of the building and they fell on that corner. Well, there was a young man and his son sitting in the car getting ready to go in for his little boy's speech therapy. Had Kristen not trimmed those bushes, the guy in the car would not have seen this woman fall and be able to go and assist her and help her up. And so just, those little things that make such a difference, all because someone wanted to say, thanks for letting me have my art studio here. And this woman was able to get quick response and care. Not that you want someone to fall, but do you know what I'm saying? It's just this little things that happen through all of our interactions and through all of our willingness to hear what God is asking us to do.
I think as I listen to your story and think about you, with your history, your education, having an MBA, and then the business work, it's one of the things that I think we're seeing through this work is how each project is unique and it's based on context, where a church is and what the needs in that community are, right? So that's what you discovered is actually what was needed was affordable business rates, right? Like affordable business rental space. And then it's out of the passions of the people and the skills of the people. And I just love it. So for me, of course, like as you tell the story, it's like we can just see God's fingerprints all over it. Mm-hmm. So I love that. Yeah, I do wonder though, I mean, what would you say to other pastors that are at the beginning of this journey?
I would say look for your partners. Ask questions in your community. Find those people that have their finger on the pulse of what's happening in your area. I talked to so many people before we ever got here. Like I mentioned the Chamber of Commerce, I mentioned the Gateway Initiative, the Small Business Development Center, just any group of people that I thought might have some insight for us. And they were great to just help us find the people we needed to talk to or the resources that we needed. I think that, pastors, this isn't what we're trained for in seminary. And so there's going to be a lot of pastors who don't have the MBA. But guess what? There's someone in your congregation who has the financial sense. There's someone in the community who has the pulse of the community. There are people around you that you bring into the conversation to help you work through those things. And I talk with lots of excitement about what's going on. It hasn't been without its challenges. There's definitely challenges that we have faced, But when you have the right people as part of the conversation, it's easier to overcome those challenges.
What's an example of a challenge? I mean, because often we just hear the positives of these stories, and none of them exist without challenges. That just doesn't ever happen. But you don't hear those on podcasts very often. So tell us a couple of them.
Okay, so here's a couple, and one of which is it's a personnel issue. I told you we have a massage therapist, and we have a preschool speech therapist. I don't know if you can see where there might be some problems. Kids are not quiet. And when you have a massage, you want it to be quiet. And so some of those challenges have just been me trying to help the business owners figure out how to talk about that and how to create space for one another for an occasional kid that loses it on the way in or out of speech therapy. Another big issue we've had is with this new daycare. The fire marshal and the city code inspectors and all of the things that need to be done physically to the space, and who incurs those costs? Is it us? Is it the business owner? And so we had to negotiate how that was going to work. What are we going to do? We want her to succeed, but we don't have a lot of capital cash that we can put into that. And so there were some creative ways of writing things into agreements. Like if we were to cancel her agreement within X amount of time, we would pay this percentage of the cost of this item, kind of thing. And so there's lots of different things that come up like that. Even how the building's getting locked and unlocked. Who's going to be in charge of turning off the lights? Who's going to make sure that the trash gets taken out of the bathroom if someone drops a dirty diaper in there? It's all of those things, but we have created we told the business owners, we want this to be, yes, their business space, but also sanctuary space, also space where they feel like they can come to us and talk to us about anything. And so we've created a conversation space, partially with this quarterly luncheon that we do together, partially just, you're always welcome in my office to come talk. And that has been really good to help address those challenges that come up.
I wonder if we could talk about the economics a bit. Just some of the nuts and bolts and look under the hood. I wonder how much capital did you have to put in to start to get ready to use your space in this way?
We really didn't have to put much in at all. Like I said, we had somebody that volunteered to pay for the locks and put those and paid for someone to install those. We did have to fix an air conditioning unit because it had been broken. And since we weren't using the space, we hadn't done that. But we had some people that were generous and gave over and above their normal giving to help make that happen. We've just been really gifted with people who just can do the work without us having to pay for a lot of things. And even one of the tenants, he just put some vinyl lettering on a door, but then wanted to switch offices. And so he just moved the doors for us because he wanted that door. So a lot of that has just been, people have been very generous to help us get going. And is there more we would like to do? Absolutely. We'd like to make some internet upgrades and things like that, but that's just not been in the cards yet. We will get there. But here's the other piece of that. I told you they had enough to pay me for 2 years, right? And I've been here for 4. And it was a little over a year ago that the extra money in that extra fund was gone. So there's no safety net. And we have just gotten through summer, which is the leanest time of a church's budget year, most everywhere. We've just gotten through summer with all of our bills paid, all of our payroll paid, and money still in the bank. And that is a testament to God's provision, because it just didn't look like there was any way out of this mess that we were in. And I can't even hardly talk about it without being emotional, just knowing that I believed, a year and a half ago when I was thinking 6 months and I'm going to be done. And I was like, God, did you really move us here for this to only be for 2 years? And here we are 2 years after that, and still here and thriving because we were obedient to do what God was calling us to do.
Oh, what a testament. And I do think it's interesting, because the next question I was going to ask is, how has the project changed the financial future of the church? And it seems like it really has.
And not that we are flush with money, but our bills are paid. And really, isn't that all we need? All we need to do is pay our bills so that we can continue to minister. And yeah, it's beautiful. It really is beautiful.
I mean, that's pretty transformational. I mean, like, not being flush with money or having, that's not, like you said, isn't really the judge, but to be able to go from a place of really short runway, really a great deal of uncertainty, to a place where you are functioning and you have a functional budget and you have a functional congregation with, financial viability. That's transformational. I mean, that's huge.
It is, because it changes how our session meetings go. It changes how people talk about the church, how they think about the church. There's not this impending doom that's sitting on all of our shoulders, because now there's like, oh, there's hope. There's hope. And I'm going to get her, I think her McKibben, I believe is her last name. She wrote a book about hope. And in that book, she talks about this idea of finite hope versus infinite hope. And we talked about this in our session. We might say, and this was probably a year and a half ago, we talked about this. We might say, oh, we got this business center up and going. We're good. Now we can just coast. But I said, no, that's finite. God is infinite. And so we have to constantly be thinking, what does God have for us next? And I think that is how we've gotten to where we are, where we're like, oh, well, maybe God would have us share our space with this new church. Maybe God would have us share our space with this gal that wants to open a daycare. Maybe God would have us share our space by creating a community garden, which is the next thing on our radar. And that has been something where we're constantly thinking forward now, instead of, oh, we fixed this problem and now we can just coast. And I think that has been really helpful, to have that idea of, no, God is infinite. Things are always going to be changing and new, and we've got to keep listening for what that is.
Yeah, you didn't just change once. You became a changing, evolving, risk-taking, new thing entity, right? And that's now, once you've practiced it and like learned it and done it, you can keep doing it.
Keep doing it. Yes. Yeah.
It reminds me, we had someone on a previous episode. It was the same. It's like, once there's one thing going, it's like, oh, then we can do another thing. And so it's like, it just becomes generative, right? And there's this new momentum.
Because people are now coming with ideas all the time. They're just popping up. People are like, oh, but what if we did this? Oh, what if we did this? Oh, what if we did this? And not worried about, well, how are we going to fund it? How are we going to pay for it? Well, we'll figure it out, because if it's something God wants us to do, guess what? God will provide. And I have to say, Mark, your book, We're Not Broke, that was a critical book for my team to read, to just be reminded that we have resources that are outside of financial resources that we can share. And it was just really, really a good piece of our journey, was learning from you and what you have learned from.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I was actually going to ask along those lines. You did the what we call now the Good Futures Accelerator. It was Oikos in its pilot. What parts of that were most helpful along the way?
You know, just some of the brainstorming stuff was really good, but the getting out into the community, kind of prayer walking, talking to people, whatever, that's something that the people in the congregation really got into. And we got so much feedback from people when we did that part, because it invited them to actually open their eyes and look around them instead of getting in your car, driving to church, coming in the building, getting out of, going out of the building, getting in your car, driving home. It invited them to actually walk around our neighborhood. And we are in a particular neighborhood in Gulf Shores. And it has made us also very aware of the fact that we are in this neighborhood. And now we're starting to ask those questions of how do we now specifically engage the neighborhood instead of just the community as a whole. So that was probably one of my favorite pieces, was just getting everybody thinking and looking at the community itself. And the trip to San Antonio we had at the end, seeing other churches and what they were doing was a very inspiring and made me hopeful for the future of the Big C Church.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It sounds like you really, went through the process of thinking about what people are looking for, what people need, what the opportunities are in the community before diving into the how do we change the locks and do the land, all the how do we create the leases and all the things that have to eventually happen. Those do have to happen, but that's not the starting point, right? I mean, the starting point is listening, it's engaging, it's exploring partnerships, it's all that stuff that you've just been talking about. And then those other things, they can work themselves out.
And it makes your day then when you start the conversation and you're saying things like, we have to see this as a ministry. This cannot be a financial only thing. This has to be about how we minister to our community. And then as the conversation continues month by month, and you start hearing your session members pop up with, we have to think about this as a ministry. It's like they caught that. And because of that, I honestly believe that's why the church got on board as a whole. That's why there's ownership of what we're doing, is because we see it as a ministry. And yes, absolutely, it helps our bottom line, but that is not our purpose.
I want to just say, actually, too, you've done it pretty quickly, and you did it kind of on the cheap. Like, I mean, in terms of, there's a lot of churches out there that are sort of look at these things and it's overwhelming, right? Either housing is a 5 to 7 year project very often, sometimes even longer, and requires massive amounts of investment, right, in some form or another, or some of the other. But what you've described to us is a transformational activity for missionally and financially that was relatively quick with relatively little upfront money, and that's pretty cool.
It really is. It really is. And I'm actually working on a doctorate, and I'm, thinking about, so what's my project going to be? And I think one of the things I am really thinking about is how can I talk to 2 or 3 churches in our presbytery and maybe help them kind of start asking these same questions, not churches that are on the edge of dying, but the ones that are in decline, that need to start thinking now about what that might look like, and just start having those conversations. What can you do with what you have that doesn't require a huge outlay of money, but makes an impact in your community? And I think that is a conversation that needs to be happening just across the board in every church, because I think we all have seen that the old model of church is just not sustainable forever. It has to grow, it has to morph, it has to transform. What they were doing in Acts 4 is not what we can do today. We have to completely change as the culture changes, as the world we live in changes. And so I just want to see more and more churches asking these questions.
Um, yeah, I love it. I do think it's such a good reminder that it's the two together. It's the alignment of money and mission. That it's not just generating money to do our thing. It's where it comes together that's so important. So we're gonna move to some rapid fire questions before we wrap up. You can just, we're doing this with all of our guests. So, what is one thing you wish people in the pew knew? The average church goer, what do you wish they knew?
Oh, I wish they knew about this idea.
About this type of work.
Okay.
About this type of work.
Okay. I wish they knew all of the conversations that are required to make something like this happen, that it doesn't just happen like that.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned we're not trained for this at seminary, which I agree with. And I think many pastors would agree with. What do you wish seminaries were training pastors for in this moment for the future version of the church?
I think that seminaries should be teaching pastors about finances and how to read financial statements and how to make decisions about budgeting and all of those things. I think that is a key piece that so many pastors don't have a grip on when they go into the church. And so if they don't have a grip on that, they can't even begin to think about how we might do things differently from a financial standpoint.
You mentioned the numerous partnerships and relationships in the wider community that it takes to do this work. What do you wish that people in city government or in the Chamber of Commerce, what do you wish they knew about churches starting to do this work?
I'm speaking particularly about this community that we're in. I wish that they understood that everything that we are doing with a mind toward building up our community. Sometimes I think that gets lost. They think we're doing it just for us. And I just say it all the time when I have to interact with them, but we're doing this because we want to see our community thrive. So I want them to know that when we're doing something, we're thinking for the community. We're not just thinking for our church.
Mm-hmm. If you could go back, 3 years, 4 years, what's one thing you wish you knew then that you know now?
Wow. I'm not sure. I really am not sure, because I think that everything I've learned came at the time that I needed to learn it. Everything that I've been through came at the time when I needed to go through it. And if I had known 4 years ago how bad the financial situation was here, I'm not sure if I would have taken this call. And so I think sometimes it's better not to know the things that you don't know.
Yeah, it's all part of the journey. And yeah, that's interesting. That's a great response. Yeah.
Okay, Chrisy, finally, we are asking all of our guests this season one question. As you consider the reality of the world and the witness of the church in this moment, what is your hope for the church, for the wider church?
My hope for the wider church is simply that we would lean into what it means to truly love God and love our neighbor, and that doesn't look like it has always looked to the church. It looks like it's always looked to Jesus, but it doesn't necessarily look like it's always looked to the various iterations of church. And so how can we truly be those people who live out the love of Christ wherever we go, with whoever we talk to, and whoever we invite into our circle, whether that's into our church, into our lives? I feel like many churches have lost this idea of truly loving one another and working for the benefit of one another. We get a little selfish. I told my congregation a few weeks ago, sometimes I think we get a little hangry because we haven't been feeding enough on who Jesus is. And I want us all to be filled with Jesus so that we can spread that love.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us and just for the work that you're doing. I want to come to Gulf Shores one day and see it personally. So thank you. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
That's really inspiring. Thank you.
I'm just grateful to you guys for the work that you have done and that has benefited us in going through this process. And I got a call last week. Somebody was asking me if they should go through that process. And I called them back and said, I would love to talk to you about that. So I'm waiting for a return call on that one because I want to talk to them and say, yes, do it.
Oh, thank you.